The first selection I will read is from the collaboration that Elizabeth Ann Scarborough and I did last year. She came to Ireland originally to get some group music from the folk music scene here. And while she was, you at dinner table, we started working with ideas. And having lived in Alaska, Annie had some very good ideas. And I was her guest in Alaska, in Fairbanks. And she made sure that I saw a lot of the things that she considered unusual about the Alaskan adventure. And so we were saying, gee, there really hasn't been a cold planet book. And we sort of hashed the idea around and decided to write a story called The Powers That Be. We decided who our main characters would be so that each would write those particular main characters. Now, her pet was a girl named Bunica, who was introduced in the first scene. My main character was Yanaba Maddock, who is a discharged vet, discharged because of medical reasons. So this is chapter 1. I'll start out at the beginning, at least with this one. Stifling in the crowded processing center of Pataby Spaceport, Yanaba Maddock eyed the side door as a drowner would eye a drifting spar. Unobtrusively making her way to it, she hoped it wasn't locked. It was, but the lock was not proof against the skills she had acquired in her years as a company soldier, investigator, explorer, training officer, and most recently, long-term resident of a medical facility. Automatically checking to see if her activity was being noticed, Yana slid the door open, just wide enough to accommodate her thin body. She paused to put on her gloves, for she always took briefings seriously, and she had no wish to leave the skin of her fingers stuck to the frozen surfaces. For a moment she leaned back against the slide panel to secure it in case she had been noticed. Then the cold air hit her. She knew from previous cold weather training not to inhale the freezing blast that whipped around the corner of the building and slammed into her face. The computer aboard the shuttle from ship to port had cautioned the temperature of planet terraformation B, commonly called PT-B, at certain locations during certain points in the time during the winter can range as low as minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold, troops. Do not touch metal objects with your unprotected epidermis. Do not run or the air will freeze into small icicles in your lungs and lacerate them. Always wear or carry your winter gear with you at all times. Do not count on a nice warm vehicle for comfort. For one thing, there is a shortage of nice warm vehicles on Pataby because machinery that doesn't freeze and crack in the extreme cold is expensive. For another thing, even the expensive equipment breaks down and you may find yourself stranded. The temperature at Kilcool Space Base today is minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of the locals have been known to regard this as relatively tropical by comparison with what they consider real winter. Bear in mind that summer to these same individuals consists of 2 months of fairly constant daylight as warm as 55 to 60 degrees above zero, still 12 to 17 degrees colder than regulation shipboard settings of 72 degrees. So button up your outer gear because the wind blows free, and take good care of yourselves, remembering at all times that your ass belongs to the company. That is all. Yana had laughed to hear the computer briefing given in the gruff voice and speech patterns of a senior NCO, but she was no more inclined to ignore the warning than she would have been had it been issued by a flesh-and-blood top sergeant. Minus 200, huh? Good thing she'd gotten here during a heat wave. Icicles lacerating her already trashed lungs would do nothing for her convalescence. Fumbling with the outerwear that had been broiling her in the facility, she pulled her scarf across her mouth, flipped the hood to her head, pulled it down across her forehead, which was fast becoming wooden with cold, and tucked the scarf securely up to her eyes before she tied the hood under her chin. Cold though the air was, with a taint of overheated oil and space fuel from the snow-rimmed Plascrete landing pad, the freshness of it, warmed by her breath as she inhaled through the muffling fabric, was clean. One of the small joys of her life were those first moments of breathing fresh, unadulterated, unrecycled air, the real stuff. She inhaled through her mask, catching a taste of smells which permeated her scarf but they were inconsequential. She began to take deeper breaths, tentatively at first, because her lungs were still not working as well as they should. One of the reasons she was the perfect candidate for PTB in the eyes of her employers. She wanted to flush the dead air space of a spaceship out of her poor, abused lungs. They'd have even more of a chance to heal here in an unpolluted atmosphere than in the rarefied aisles of the medical complex back on Andromeda Station. She took in one deep breath too many and started to cough, gasp, choke until her eyes teared with the spasms. Panting with short chest inhalations, she managed to get control again. The tears froze in her cheeks and she brushed them away. Grimly she thought that you could have too much of a good thing, even air, and she'd better get back inside. For all she was wearing garb appropriate to the new climate, she could feel her fingers and toes numbing. She spared one look at the horizon, the great bowl of a blue sky without so much as a defense shield over the spaceport, and the ice-covered land, and wondered if she really had made the right decision. Slipping back inside, she pushed the hood off, pulled back the scarf, and scanned her nearest neighbors. Only one of them seemed to notice that she had been and come back. He blinked and frowned before turning his attention to the screen at the far end of the long hall, where the names of those to be processed were blinking. Maddock was one of them. Startled, for she was not to call attention to herself in any way, she moved forward, squeezing past people, till she came to the more eager layers of folk packed tightly as they waited for release. Maddock, why? She said to the official, offering her plastics. ID, he said, without even looking up from his terminal. She extended her left wrist, and with rough fingers he turned it so he could see it, bending her hand painfully. You're cold. He looked up, seeing her as a person, not a number. She shrugged. Leaning against that door. Didn't you listen to the briefing? He frowned. Don't touch metal. Even inside? She asked with the innocent, inquiring look she had used to flummox brighter men than this one. He frowned, and then the terminal required his attention, her plastic having jumped out of the processing slot. It skidded half across the worktop before he caught it. Yana kept her face straight, for he looked the sort not likely to appreciate chasing anything, much less plastic. A slip of film extruded from the slot by her hand. That is your work number, which you will memorize, work assignment, living quarters, ration status, travel and clothing allowance, and the name of your official guide as well as his office hours. Your travel pack has already been delivered to your quarters. Then he paused and startled her by smiling. You can take one of the waiting vehicles outside the terminal, Major Maddock. Welcome to Pitavi. Amazed by both the courtesy and the unexpected smile, Yana thanked him and moved smartly out of the way. Her place was immediately occupied by the stocky woman who had been peering over her shoulder during Yana's interview. A translucent roof shield protected the area outside the passenger terminal. It didn't protect from the noise level and confusion of processed arrivés, most of them lugging their precious 3.5-kilo personal allowance sacks about as they searched for each other or transportation. Yellow slip, huh? Someone said in her ear, pulling her hand down to peer at it. The someone was a young girl, in her early to mid-teens, though her keen gray eyes were alive with intelligence and interest, so bundled in furs that only her face was visible, and that slightly obscured by long wisps of fur and possibly her own hair. I'm cleared for yellow, too, the girl added, and her mittened hand shoved a plastic square under Yana's eyes. The woman grabbed her hand for a longer look at the official-looking plastic. The girl didn't resist, though her eyes widened slightly at the strength of Yana's grasp. The plastic covered printed documentation licensed Bunnica Rourke to convey passengers in an authorized snorkel within the environs of the port, but no further. There was a large A in the right-hand corner and a renewal date sometime later on in Patavi's year. How much? Bunnica blinked and then grinned Bunnica Rourke blinked and then grinned companionably. From here to your place, it's on the PTBs. The PTBs? Yana wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Bunnica's grin broadened, and her eyes twinkled with mischief. Sure, PTB, the powers that be. Pitabi, she said. You didn't know that's where the planet got its name? The briefing said it was Planet Terraformation B, Yana said. The girl waved her mitten dismissively. They would manage to make it sound dull, but it's really named after them, the powers that be, that move us from A to B or Z or wherever they gotta plug holes or clean up disasters or fight wars. Come on, let me get you out of this mess and give you a proper welcome to Batavia. The girl tugged at Yana's sleeve, pointing to a battered-looking but clean orange-yellow snorkel with fluorescent numerals MTS 8084. Those numerals had also been displayed on the plastic ID. But as Yana stepped off the curb, a big figure intervened. "Yellow ticket? I take yellow tickets," and the man glared menacingly at the girl. "You don't want to ride with this flitterface. She turn you over into snowdrift. No one finds you. Yellow ticket deserves big, warm snorkel," and he gestured towards the lard's sleek affair. "I'm all ready," she began. "Terse, she's legally mine." "You ain't cleared for yellows," the man said, hunching belligerently over the girl. He was a tall enough man, but the furs made him even more bulky. "And two," she waved her ID at him, and snarling, he batted at her hand, dismissing her qualifications. "I got a passenger all legal, Terse. You weren't even here." Yana deftly inserted herself between them and made eye contact with the intruder. "I've already accepted Rourke's assistance, but I thank you for your willingness to transport me. I gotta, dama." At first, Yana thought he was swearing at her, and then realized he was bowing with great subservience, and that there was an edge of anxiety in voice and manner. "You're safer with me," the girl said, glaring such a challenge first at Yana and then at Terse that Yana sensed there was more at stake than a fare. "Look, girl, another yellow ticket," and as Terse distracted her with a gesture towards a man, yellow ticket plainly visible in his hand, "you take him." Then he took a firm hold on Yana's upper arm, swinging her towards his vehicle. Deftly, almost automatically, Yana disengaged her arm and then strode across to the battered little MTS-registered snorkel. "Dama, dama," cried Terse, real concern in his voice. Yana ignored him, lengthening her stride when she heard the triumphant exclamation from Bunica and her boots slithering across the snow mush behind her. Yana hit the door release on the passenger side, paused a moment to catch her breath before she slung her sacks into the rear storage shelf. Still chuckling over her success, the girl slid into the driver's seat. "You'd better button up. This thing takes longer to warm up than Terse's fancy sleigh. And I'm safer with you?" Yana asked at her driest as she rearranged her hood and scarf, belted into the seat before slipping back into the fur mittens. The girl's eyes crinkled. "Well, Terse is known to do errands for folk. My hunch is he was there on purpose to collect you. If you'd wanted to go with him, you could have, of course, but you didn't. So you didn't know he was there to meet you. So you're safer with me, especially the way he was acting. He's not very bright." Her remark was couched in a kindly tone, but held a hint of caution nonetheless. She glanced over to Yana, her eyes bright, alert. "Well," thought Yana, "an hour on the planet and intrigue starts already. Never a dull moment, no matter what the space flot about PTB was. PTB, the powers that be." She chuckled to herself, but let that also be an answer for her driver. The chuckle turned into one of her coughing fits, and she fumbled in her sack between spasms for her bottle of syrup. She was suddenly weak with the effort it took to draw enough breath between the explosions which threatened to blow her ribs apart. The fur mittens made her hands clumsy, and she almost dropped the bottle before she could peel a mitten from her shaking hand and get the plastic cap off. As soon as the syrup began to coat her larynx, the spasm eased. She cradled the bottle in her hands against her chest. The preparation had a lot of alcohol in it, but she wouldn't risk it freezing. The girl, Rourke, slowed the vehicle and looked back at her with wide eyes. Poor kid looked as if she was wishing that she'd let Terse take her fare. "Are you all right, Major?" Yana gulped another swallow of the syrup, this time feeling the warmth spreading into the poisoned cavities of her damaged lungs. Every time she coughed, the images flashed through her brain of the graphic films the doctor had shown her when they explained why she was no longer fit for active duty. As if the fact that she couldn't laugh or hoist a duffel bag without a paroxysm of coughing wasn't enough evidence of her disability. Still, she was alive, which was more than the others were. She recapped the bottle, tucked it into her parka pocket, and pulled the mitten back over her hand. It was already going numb with cold. She noted with satisfaction, however, that there was no blood on either mitten. Catching the girl's anxious look, she said, "Don't worry, Rourke, it's not contagious. Took a little gas at Bremport Station was all." "From the sound of that cough, you must have had a very nasty time of it," the girl remarked, speeding up slightly again, but proceeding more cautiously than before, as if afraid the jarring would set her passenger off again. "You might say that," Yana said, thinking of the others. The hell of it was, she'd been through a lot worse in her younger days, and had come through without a scratch. This was supposed to have been a routine training mission. New recruits, a couple of them from Petaby, she remembered. She remembered just about everything from that mission, over and over and over again. She used the technique she'd learned a long time ago from one of her old sergeants and switched her focus, letting her eyes rest on the panorama of blue and white nothingness, the featureless landscape soothing her, helping her blank her mind, the cold in the air matching the cold inside her. Ground-hugging vegetation pierced lumps of snow with frozen stalks that looked like spines. Then she noticed that the snokel track was on ground slightly lower than the rest of the terrain. "You guys dig a new road here, huh?" she asked her driver. Rourke snorted. "Not a bit of it. Do you think they'd be spending money on improvements for the likes of us? This is the river." "No kidding." Yana looked out and down. Where the snow had blown away in one patch, she saw the translucence of powder blue ice. Anybody ever fall into the ice? Not lately. Even this late in winter, it's still between -75 and -30 most of the time. If everything is frozen, what do you do about drinking water? Company leaders automatically considered such details. "Oh, that. I'll show you." The girl grinned and continued on. After a few moments, the ground had more rise and fall to it. Beside it, stunted trees, rooted and branched in billows of snow, began appearing closer and closer together until they formed a sparse forest on either side of the snokel. The girl veered the machine over towards the trees, and around the next bend, Yana saw a little pavilion set up on the ice, smoke rising from a hole at the top. Rourke had been decreasing the speed of her snokel and now drifted to a gentle stop. The tent shook slightly from within, and what at first looked like a bear emerged. "Slanta, Bunny," the bear said, waving, dispelling the illusion. The fur-clad man, and indeed his skins were ursine in appearance too, lumbered forward, lifting his great fur boots high above the snow. His face bristled with icicles from the ruff around his mouth and nose, which was only lightly frosted, to his beard, eyebrows, and mustache, which were thickly encrusted with ice. "Slanta, Uncle Seamus," the girl waved back and cut the motor. The man's eyes flicked up through his personal icicles to glance at Yana, a searching look for all its brevity. "This is Major Maddock, Uncle. She's going to be staying at Kilcool." "Is she now?" He included Yana in his wave, and she nodded at him. "Did you have some thermos or two for me to take to Auntie, since I'm passing her way?" Bunny asked. "That would be very good of you, Bunny. I've two now, and I'll have more later when Charlie and the dogs come along. This dama doesn't mind stopping on her way, does she?" "Nah, she won't mind, will you, Major? You wanted to see how we got water. Come look inside the shed." Moving a little more slowly than she'd like, Yana climbed from the snokel. Out here on the river, the cold immediately clenched its fist around her face and thighs, which weren't encased in sin fur like the rest of her. She hoisted the muffler around her nose, but that didn't filter out the sweet smell of wood smoke. She wondered if that would set her coughing again. But there was Bunny, encouragingly holding up the flap of the tent. She pointed to the fire burning in a circle around the rim of a long black hole in the ice. An insulated container on a length of line stood beside the hole, along with two other containers which Seamus now gave Bunny. Yana took a couple of steps towards the tent before the smoke from the fires wafted towards her. She felt her throat seizing up and stepped back, silently cursing her weakness. How the frag was she going to survive on a cold planet if she couldn't breathe in the presence of fire? This story is to be published by Del Rey in July, but I suspect that some of the larger chains will have it available in June. There's a very good cover by Rowena that I think will pull more readers in, because you'll have to try and figure out just what all those elements are. So it's a good cover. The second one is The City Who Fought, which I wrote with Steve Sterling, S.M. Sterling, I beg your pardon. It's one of the ship stories. In this case, it's called The City Who Fought because the brain is actually the city manager of a space station way out there. He has just acquired a new brawn, and Simeon is not quite certain that he likes this brawn that has been chosen to serve with him. Shanna emerged into the lounge, heading for the table in her morning coffee. A wave of sound struck her, very much a wave, like plunging into a curling jade-green wall that seized her and bore her up towards the beach. She couldn't help but recognize the music as the triumphal march from the Empress of Ganymede by Usher. She paused with a slight frown when she realized that she had unconsciously altered her stride to suit the march tempo. She stopped, and her pause was the length of a measure. She laughed when she realized that. "Does this get to mean I'm the queen today?" "Actually," said Simeon, "after your restless night, I decided something upbeat would suit." "Well, I sure got off on the right foot then," she said, with a sound approximating a giggle. Simeon was pleased. Last night their relationship really had turned a corner. They were going to be all right. "So good morning to you, Simeon," she said with an impish smile, "and a good morning right back at you, as Patsy Sue would say." Shanna nodded and went to her console, pulling the note screen towards her. "Then we had better get to work." She cleared her throat. "I've been going over your accounts, Simeon, and I've got to say that you have some weird entries. For example, tucked away in the fourth quarter is the notation stuff. You'll have to be more specific than stuff." "Why? Stuff is acceptable to the accountants," he said in a facetious tone. "I'm not an accountant. I'm supposed to be your partner. Would you explain stuff?" "It's like this, Shanna. I buy things that interest me. Me, Simeon, not the station master brain. Never mind that also accounted for why he hadn't paid off his natal debt to Central Worlds. So I'm a pack rat. Is that her business now?" Far out in space, Simeon's peripheral monitors, the ring of sensors that warned of incoming traffic, began to transmit information that suggested a very large object was headed their way. From the ripples it caused in subspace, it was very large or very fast, or both. He split his attention between her and the alert and sent a communicator pulse in the direction of the disturbance. There were strict rules on how to approach a station. Approaching unheralded broke half a dozen regs and invariably caused stiff credit penalties. "Respond to hailing," he transmitted. "Respond immediately." "Well, we've got this inspection and auditing coming up in 2 weeks," he heard Shanna saying in a firm, let's-not-beat-about-the-bush tone. "We have got to have everything ship-shape and Bristol fashion, partner." He did appreciate that she subtly reminded him of her promise to help with Joette, but this was no time for petty details. "I don't have a ship-shape, Shanna," he muttered in his distraction, "but I do have something very unusual out there approaching me without due protocol." Visual information was now reaching him. Dropping out of interstellar transit and approaching at Great Goose 7.17 C, a large vessel whose profile did not fit any known human ship. The basic hull form was spherical, but carried a web of crazy quilt additions, constructions of girders and latticework. Some of them looked as if they had been slashed off short with energy beams, and the cut points were tattered. People were generally not sloppy with cutting tools. enemies were. Simeon relayed a standard "please identify" message and put the tug bays on standby. "Nor am I a bristle," he continued to Channa. "The inspectors will be when they come, though." Oh, wait a minute. "Nor am I a bristle," he continued to Channa. "Nor am I a bristle," he continued to Channa. "The inspectors will be when they come, though." Channa groaned. "Even for you that was lame. You're being unusually ridiculous, Simeon. You know that mentality that goes with these inspections. Sentence first, trial afterwards. In other words, off with our heads, if they could reach mine. And us running as fast as we can to stay in one place, too. Which capability you don't also have, Simeon. Now, since this is my first time with you—" "Oh, Channa, pant, pant." "Simeon," she warned him, "I know where the controls for your hormone balance are." "Sorry. What's the worst they can do to me? What's the worst they can do to me? Send me back to asteroidic purgatory? Like I told you, I'm only on temporary duty here anyway." Channa had been running a scan. "There are 12 entries for the word stuff. You want this to be a temporary assignment? You may get your wish." "It's not a wish, my dear. I never said I wish they'd take me away from here and put me anywhere else. I've a very definite destination in mind, as you so astutely concluded the other evening. If I had my druthers, I'd be running a command ship and waging Star Wars on the axial perimeter, but—" and he gave a huge audible sign. "Who believes in wishes anymore? You do, with all your war games and tactical daydreams." The approaching ship still had not responded, nor was it dumping speed as fast as it should. In fact, whoever was in command had waited much too long to begin doing so. The flare of drive energies should be blanking out the whole quadrant, and the neutrino flux was barely enough for a pile just ticking over. Simeon came to a disagreeable conclusion. "Whoa there, Channa. We've got stuff, not mine, coming in to make mincemeat of us if we're not careful. Have a look?" Simeon slapped up on the main view screen, the intruder bearing down on them. Surprise and alarm held Channa motionless for only a split second before she reacted. "I'm alerting the perimeter guard," she said, wiping her previous program and inputting the new. "Right." Although he had already done so, two sources of the same alert emphasized the emergency. "I'm busy calculating how to cushion the impact of that great hulking mass whistling towards us. I hope they know where the brakes are." Nice to have a brawn to share emergency work. The station personnel should get used to dealing with her. Stabbing the alert button on the main console, Channa then called up a finer resolution of the object, which to her appeared to be a darker mass against the black of space. "Unannounced arrival!" She transmitted the image to the personnel on the perimeter traffic control, alerting them to the pertinent vector and ordering them to begin rerouting incoming traffic. "How do you know it's whistling towards us?" she asked in as calm a voice as he was using, while her fingers flew over the consoles. "There's no sound in space." Simeon could detect just a micro-tremor of fear in her non-committal tone. "If I think it whistles," he answered, "it whistles. Perimeter says it's like nothing they've ever seen before, and—" she paused and licked her lips, "it's about to cut a broad swath through the traffic pattern." Simeon took full control of the traffic control boards. He could see and respond to the necessary changes in traffic patterns faster than any unshelled human. He was simultaneously redirecting and responding to dozens of ships. Suddenly, Channa started cursing. "Damn their eyes and innards. These damn civilians are asking questions instead of doing what they're supposed to do in routine emergencies. Now you see why I didn't like you calling those false alarms. No one's paying a blind bit of attention to this genuine emergency. Wolf crier! I put it on every public screen. They'll know it's no wolf," Simeon said, his voice velvet with malice, "and it's coming straight at us. Don't think it'll stop." "I didn't realize you could banter when you were terrified," he thought with tight control, though it helped being able to set your analog of adrenal glands. Channa stared, stunned, as a screen filled with the alien ship. "You haven't activated the repel screen. Hit it, for God's sakes!" She pressed her rocker switch just a fraction of a second behind Simeon. And you'll have to read the book to find out what happens, and if they indeed did manage to keep the ship from plowing through the space station. I won't tell you. The name of the book is The City Who Fought by Anne McCaffrey and S.M. Sterling. And it's coming out from, where is it coming out from? Bain Books, hardcover. It's the first hardcover for Steve Sterling.
Oh, good.
And it's a very nice cover design.